Yo, 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 welcome back to the Further Your Lifestyle podcast, conversations on lifestyle, passions, and hustles. My name's CLFurlong. I am your host of the podcast, and once again, we are back here for another exciting episode, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to our guest for this week, and that is Chantra. I've known May for probably about 2.5 years. She's been part of the brand before Further Your Lifestyle, which was Furry, and she became an ambassador purely because of her fearless presence that she brings, more so around the kickboxing, but just in everything that she's doing. And she's no person to muck around with. I mean, she's got a background in psychology and behavioural economics, which is just brilliant. And May brings the combination of perspective, fascination, and also to challenge the norm with the fresh mindset of, how not everything we see is as it seems to be. So we really do touch on a lot in this episode. It's very jam-packed. It's more of a conversation, to be honest, and that's what I love about it. We're talking about, what is the norm versus what is the new, and these ideas of how we are transitioning from, I guess, a pivotal point in our generation, in our world, and in our society. But we also dive into the art of kickboxing. And yes, she's a kickboxer, so look out. And how this opens up a whole world of self-awareness, becoming a better version of yourself, and how to leverage lemons that life throws at you. So make sure you get comfortable, make sure you get cozy, grab a cup of coffee, cup of tea, however it is you like to listen. We are on YouTube, we are on Spotify, we are on Apple Podcasts as well. So however you want to listen or watch, make sure you do get comfortable, and I'm excited for this episode. I really am. It's a great episode, and May's a wonderful and brilliant person, so I think you will not regret it. So let's get into it. Welcome, May. It's so good to have you on the Further Your Lifestyle podcast. How are you going today?
Thank you. Very good, and super excited to be chatting with you, Chris.
Well, the pleasure's all mine. We've known each other for a very long time, yet it took us, probably year and a half, maybe even 2 years to finally meet in person, which was it's probably almost a couple of months back now. And with the roller coaster of COVID and everything in between, the lockdowns in Melbourne, it's been a bit of a journey, but I'm so glad to finally be able to do this.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, like when I first met you, I was like, I wonder who this guy is. Like your page had all these different people, and then I was like, maybe he's from the US, and you sent me the sweater. And I was like, oh yeah, Melbourne's in lockdown. You're like, I'm in Melbourne too. And I was like, oh, so you are.
That's it. It's been a long time coming, and I really do appreciate it. But less about me and more about you. So, you're a lot of things. You're doing some amazing and cool things, whether it's in your job and industry you're working in, but also you have some cool hobbies and things on the side. So I would love for the audience to get to know you a bit better. So can you tell us who you are, what you're all about, and what you're currently doing at the moment?
For sure. So nice to meet everybody. My name's May, and I'm currently working as a research consultant in market research. So that's something I kind of fell into after studying psychology and business. Worked out really well. Funnily enough, when I was studying psych and business, people were like, why are you doing that? Which is so weird because it makes so much sense now. I guess my background's always been really interested in psychology. My family are super Buddhist, so thinking about like mindfulness and understanding ourselves and other people has always been something that's like a big thing for our family. And then on the side, to keep me entertained, I train Muay Thai almost part-time, so we train quite often, about 3 hours a week,
Wow.
5 days a week, sometimes Saturdays too. And the things you learn about yourself and other people is just like, well, it's very in your face. You kind of have to learn it now, or you're going to be.
That's crazy. I had no idea it was that much training. Is that with someone else or by yourself, or is that combined?
So that's with someone else. So we have, so my coach, O'Neill Ortega, has kind of developed a fight team. So that's the way that they train. So most of these people work as well, so it's not like a full-time gig for them either, which gets quite intense and full on, especially when they're working. But essentially, we all do this after work from about 5:30 to 8 or 9.
Wow, that's crazy, and I know we'll touch on it in a bit more detail. But just coming back to your story, so do you think you're going into what you've studied and whatnot, that's kind of come from your upbringing, or was it kind of just something that sparked to you at some point that's where you wanted to get into? Like, was it because I know obviously we all have those pivot points, and sometimes we go study and then we realize it's got nothing to do with what we even wanted to do, kind of thing. But do you think it was really from an upbringing, or was it something else?
I think my upbringing always kind of kept it at my forefront, like in my mind. But, you know, like as every other student going from high school to uni, you're kind of like, what am I supposed to do? And do I do what I wanted to do when I was like 7? I wanted to be a vet. And then I'm pretty sure there was a point where I wanted to be a zookeeper just because I loved animals. And then you get a bit older and you're like, you feel all this pressure and you're like, can I do that? Like, is that okay? And I even asked my parents at one point, because I'm a little bit like artsy. I was like, hey, maybe I'll go do creative arts. And they were like, oh. So, yeah, definitely had to think about it and what I wanted to pursue. So I actually started doing biomed first. And then from there, we started doing like neuroscience. And I was like, oh,
wow.
Genetic structure, like just, you know, it's very black and white, which is fine. Not quite my thing, having a little bit of like a creative side to it. So the more I studied and kind of understood what was available at uni, which is really vast, like they don't really teach you that in school, like all the types of courses and degrees and even like pathways to do things. So I kind of had a look and was like, oh yeah, why don't I just switch out of, you know, biomed, neuroscience into psych? And you know, it's a bit more, I don't know, I felt it was a bit more picturesque on that side. A little more like, oh, that's interesting. If I alter this or this changes or this is unbalanced, then you got a whole different person.
Yeah. And so it really kind of, I guess it started to tap into that fascination that you have, you know, well, whether it's the curiosity of people or, you know, you are working in research and you're doing a lot of discovering and things like that. So I guess it took you a little bit to get into something, realize, okay, it's not really, and then kind of pivot across, which is a lot of the time what a lot of us end up doing. But sometimes it's easier said than done because it's a bit scary to make that change, right?
Yeah, it is hard, and like unless someone's like, oh yeah, this person will help you, this person will help you, like you don't really know who to go to. And like for example, my parents are immigrants, so other than my sister who was studying something else completely, and we're 7 years apart, didn't have a lot of like guidance from I guess like family really. So I was like, who do I ask? And you know, and even then, like in my family, they're essentially all chefs. I'm like, oh, I don't really want to be a chef, so yeah,
okay.
bit of finding a feet.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it, right? And I think it takes a lot of, well, boldness, and you know, I know we've talked about being fearless, but you know, to tread your own path and to go where you think you want to go and need to go, because you know, it's I mean, it's great to have family, it's great to have friends, it's great to have all that support with guardrails of, you know, you can go here, you can move this way, but you know, sometimes it's also good to, you know, tread your own path and step over that guardrail and discover it for yourself, because otherwise you won't learn. I mean, it's a bit of both, but I think discovering it yourself, it's going to help develop who you are.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing at that age, like, you know, you go from school to uni and everything's about success and doing it right. Now that I'm like an adult and you can kind of pick and choose your own path, you're like, it's not less scary. Like there's, okay, like maybe I made the wrong choice, just change it quick, like, you know, but back then it's just like, no, you have to make the right choice now. And so it just felt like a lot of pressure.
And that's, I mean, that's one of the big things that I know we've chatted about in the past, which is that whole conversation around, you know, what's normal, or you know, what's the everyday, or what's generic versus the new way of thinking about things. And there is, if we think about education, it comes back to, well, there is that norm, and you know, we're told, go do this, go try this, and there's a strong foundation to help us, I guess, give us the skills and the ability to then make those decisions. Yet it's still very pushed to a single direction. And I know you're quite passionate on this too, because we and you already said it, that you know, you didn't know what to do, you're given all these career choices, but that's kind of it. It's kind of like, oh yeah, you have to go this way. There's no like, well, what if I don't want to? What about what's over there? Or what is this? You know, there's no way to really I guess please that curiosity. And it's a bit of a challenge. And I guess hindsight, as you said, as an adult now, you can look back and think, well, you know a lot more and you can make those decisions for yourself. But do you think that now that you have that understanding,
Mm.
what is your thoughts on the whole, norm versus the new around, how we're learning to grow into this society?
I think there are definitely some basics around the norm that are definitely necessary and like helpful. I mean, as much as sometimes I think that like the education system doesn't really necessarily help you find your purpose or anything like that, I think it's still a great foundation to have and to
Yeah.
go with. And I think it's one of those things where like to make progress, you just need to keep moving. And sometimes that might mean that you're moving left instead of right, and
Yeah.
that's okay. And probably figure it out and be like, oh, and then move. But if you don't and you're stagnant and you're like, oh, I want to be like completely new and out of the box, but you don't know where to go and you stop, I think
Yeah.
like that's the issue. And I feel like it's just, yeah, it's scary sometimes to do new things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is. It's the comfort of seeing what everyone else is doing. So it feels like, well, I'm in the right position because that's what everyone else is doing. It's like the comfort of four walls. But it's not until
Yeah.
you get outside those four walls, or it becomes, rather than a square, it becomes a bit of a rectangle, and you open up to a few
Yeah.
more things that you're like, oh, okay. And your mindset, your perspective, and everything starts to change, which can be also scary because it comes as, I wouldn't say it comes as a shock, but I guess the only way to really play it back is, we're given this whole view of what society is looking like, or, get a job, go
Yes.
do this. But then you also
Yeah.
see as an example, the Instagram highlight reel of all the things of possibilities, or all the things that is going really well for people, all the success stories. And trying to
Yeah.
navigate between the two, it's like, well, what the heck am I meant to do?
Literally, it's so difficult. I was thinking the other day, like you look at those people and like even all those schemes where it's just like, oh, make, do, I don't know, do drop shipping for this one thing and then
Yeah.
just like have your bike. And you're like, well, that may work, but it's a lot of like consistency and small things that'll essentially help you get to where you need to go, whether it's like a purpose or whether it's building a business or just achieving like some of these small things. Like for example, one of my goals for myself personally is just to have a fight, and like
Yep.
that to everyone else is minuscule, means nothing. But I guess the things that you can overcome by just being like, oh, I never thought I could do it. And then you do it through these small and like consistent behaviors is just
Yeah.
such an empowering feeling.
And do you think that comes back to, maybe your fascination to discover, or, on human behavior? Or do you think it's more, I guess it's probably two perspectives or two parallels, because if you weren't doing, in the world of psychology and behavior and understanding all that, do you think you would be looking at the way you're, trying to do, a fight, in the kickboxing world? Do you think you would be looking at that differently, or do you think now that's played a bigger role?
That's a good question. I feel like it would be really difficult to disentangle, right? Because
Yeah.
like it's you and your brain
Yeah.
basically all the time. No matter what you do, you're always telling yourself something. And I think even if you weren't interested in psychology, you can't really get away from the fact that, say you were training and you were having like a really rough day and it was a really tiring day and you're like, I just want to stop, and you're like, no, I have another like 2 minutes and I have to keep going. Like, would
Yeah.
you stop? You're in the
Yeah.
middle of a fight thing. No. So I think it's just kind of tuning into what you are saying to yourself is would happen regardless for
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I'd love to. I mean, obviously, there's so many things that I want to get into, but I just want to take one step back. Is so your curiosity then for behavior and all that jazz, within your job and whatnot. Do you think, before getting into that understanding, and we've touched on the education, do you think that now makes you challenge, or I guess look at things differently, or do you just look at it maybe more with a more open mind? Because I know since, when we last chatted, when everyone brings different perspectives, it opens our mind to potentially new ideas. It's opening those four walls of a box
Yeah.
into something that's more of a possibility. But do you think, now that you have, you're studying in that area, or you've studied in that area, that's now changed your way of thinking? Or do you think you've always kind of had that?
I think it's definitely enhanced. I mean, I was always just like, sometimes you would go with the flow with what you think and what you feel.
Yeah.
And now that I'm kind of in tune with it, I'm like, wait a second, like why did that come up? And sometimes it's just intuitive, but it doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah.
And I definitely think about it a lot more, I think. And the cool thing about studying psychology, so I studied psychology at UQ, and most of the professors there are white males. But the cool thing about that is, and psychology itself is a subjective area sometimes, right? So, but they would always allude you to the fact that even if you're reading these empirical papers that are peer reviewed and
Yep.
published, that take a look at the sample. They're probably like American white uni
Yep.
students, and we're using that research to look at how people develop normally,
Yeah.
and like normally in brackets. And that was one of the coolest lectures that I ever had, and it was at the end of the semester, but he was like, it is something to consider that our area is a little bit, biased. And I
Yeah.
think that's just that's a lot of society. The things that are made in the boxes that we like kind of need to live and fulfill in, well, just, we're created by other people.
Yeah. Well, that's
So,
true.
yeah, so I guess that's where my, like, challenging the norm and being like, what do I want to do? And does this fit with where I want to go is important for people to consider.
Yeah, because you're right. It's when you think about it from that perspective, if people didn't really catch on to that, it's like everything that we
Mm,
live by, whether it's education, money, ideas in creating a better world. I mean, these all come up from someone else's original idea, how we
yeah.
value money, how we use money, the psychology of
Mm-hmm.
money. And then
Mm-hmm.
to think about the people that are trying to, as strong people such as Elon Musk trying to make a huge difference and making a big change of a shift.
Yeah.
Once again, that's his idea, his movement, and we people then follow that trend. So
Yeah.
there's always that we're following something else, we're following someone else's, not saying a dictatorship, but like following someone else's direction.
Yeah.
And it's weird to think of it that way, because you think, well, what is actually mine, what is actually original, or what is actually
Mm-hmm.
normal versus new, because there's nothing really that new, because everyone seems to be doing something of someone else's in some perspective.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, it's hard to avoid like the social pressures, no matter where it comes from, whether it's like your family or friends, or even just like media, social
Yeah.
media. Can't get away from it.
No, no, it's right, and it's quite overwhelming. I remember when we dived into the topics around how we're kind of transitioning. We're in a transitional point of in the world. I guess it will be history one time
Mm,
later, but to
mm,
make that shift of making a better world, or maybe changing how the education system works, or how we value money, that it
mm,
doesn't happen overnight. Yet the only way to do it is to implement it, one step at a time, one day at a time. It's kind of like the whole debate around, trying to be plastic free, right?
mm.
Because yeah, people think, well, why should I do it? Because it's not going to make a big difference. But if everyone has that mentality, nothing will change. But even if you
Exactly.
have 1,000 people, it's still not big enough to be able to make a change. It's going to have to happen over time. Like we're talking
Yeah,
decades
sure.
of time.
Definitely. And I guess that's where, it's really important for like governments to take charge then. Because, people, I guess, like, nice to think about, but people essentially like do what's being told, and have a look at Melbourne and our restrictions and how we're going
Yeah.
now, like those work, but they, need to be considered.
Yeah, I mean, there's always different perspectives. There's always different ways of doing things, and I would love to hear a bit more on your thoughts on. Do you think there's things that we should be teaching from a younger age, whether it is as simple as you don't have to do the 9 to 5, versus things such as how we teach people about money? Do you think that's something which should be a big change of how we operate it into education, into teaching, or do you think it should be something still left up to individuals to kind of find and navigate for themselves?
I think that's a flaw in that people need to find and navigate it for
Yeah.
themselves, because there's some people, and you can't have the whole world be billionaires. I guess maybe that's what it is. But essentially, I definitely think that there are some softer things, and even some things like financial literacy, that should definitely be taught. Like,
Yeah.
everyone should be able to understand and know that. And, like, those things flow on to having prosperous and economic like wealth, and,
Yeah.
and just, like, I'm generalizing here, but,
Yeah.
the countries in like the EU and how they're going compared to, take it from home. Like in Thailand, there's such a segregation between people who understand those things and don't. And it's just so obvious that just these basic things need to be taught. And at the end of the day, like it still comes down to your, I guess, willingness and personality and things like that for people to take what they need to. And in terms of the 9 to 5, I think it's important to understand that, like, oh yeah, and you teach kids that majority of people will probably work 9 to 5, but that's not a must. And
Yeah.
You're not going to be a failure if you don't do it that way.
Yeah, that's true.
At the same time, there is some people really would seek like consistency and certainty in having a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah. It's always a very interesting thing because, even as you said, as we grow up to be adults and we can take a different, perspective of life and where we've come from and where we're going. Do you think then, and I love this, is because I mean, by humans, we're wired in a certain way to go out and do and chase and pursue, or, and it's different for males and females in some capacities. But do you think then, because if you remove the ideas of if you remove how other people put ideas for us, then versus how we're going out and we're just free to reign, because even if we're wanting to make a change, the problem is we're still the ones setting an idea of this is what it needs to be. So then all we're really doing is changing the mind shift to, let's say it was your idea that this is the way education should be, or this is the way we should be working or teaching our young to go into society. But then versus, well, what happens to their own way of thinking? Or do you think it's just natural for us by, just by the way we're wired to just follow someone else's way, and if it seems better than what we're seeing prior, then that's what we do? It's quite messy.
No, it is really interesting. I think that, I'm not going to completely, bag the previous system for us. A lot of things work and like, but we progress and the world progresses, and I think things need to change. But the way that I guess we need to implement change, and I think this is where my like research background comes in, and not a lot of people or a lot of institutions or organizations necessarily think about it, is that, you need research behind these things. You can't necessarily be like, oh yeah, I want my kids to go into school and not have any like timetables, and they can do whatever they want and study whatever they want whenever, and you're going to have complete chaos. It's balance between, will that help them, and how do we keep a little bit of structure, because that's still important. It's such a fine balance, and I guess like there's always arguments for and against, and at the end of the day, I think like all of these decisions and things should be supported by research and stuff. Like climate change is a great conversation. It's supported by research, and yet some people still think it doesn't exist.
I mean, when you think, I mean, I know we're talking about education as a main topic, but it's just an easier one because there is so much there. But you're right to think about, okay, you want to make a change in the education system, and you used a really good example of like, oh yeah, the kids don't have to do, times tables anymore. But how do you even go about trying to take data or research or surveys or whatever to even find out what would be relevant enough to eradicate or change or pivot? Because there's so many things, like, I think about now that, oh, I should have done more business maths than, because I did math methods, which is a bit more technical. And I'm thinking it's not even relevant to anything that I'm doing now. But then again, if I hadn't done it, would it had pushed me, because I had to push myself. I really struggled in that subject. So it's kind of like, well, if I had done the other one, it would have been easier, would have been more relevant to the stuff I like doing now. But does that actually mean that it wasn't relevant, or I shouldn't have done it then? So it's like, that's just one data point on me, and you put that across millions of students. Where do you even, like, how do you even start to tackle that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, like looking at, the correlation between like what you studied and what you use. And like, I'm the same. To be honest, I'm like, do I remember what I actually studied? Like content, do I remember about my whole education, including university? Not really. But like the skills and I guess the analytics and all those things that you learn in the meantime. And I don't mean like this equation equals this, but like how to kind of look at things.
Yeah.
I mean, like from my psychology degree, now I'm just kind of like, where did that come from? You know, like someone
Yep.
will give me a piece of information or someone will say something to me, and my immediate thought now is, where did that come from?
Yep.
You know, and I think in terms of business, like you'd always kind of there'd be elements and just like basic things you would
Yeah.
know how to consider. And I think if you didn't even have that foundation, you'd just be like clueless.
Yeah.
So I like, you know, there are many things I think that we can be very resentful about almost studying. And at the end of the day, you know, 5-10 years later, we're like, oh yeah, that kind of made sense.
Yeah.
Minuscule, but it makes sense. It's like when your parents nag you to do things. Like for the longest time, I gave this example to a friend the other day. I was like, I'm so glad my parents just continue to say the same things to you over and over again. A good, like just a small example is like, you should clean your room. You
Yeah.
should do this, do that. All those small things, and you're like, but why? And then you
Yeah.
grow up and you're like the cleanest person. You're like, this is great.
Yeah.
It finally clicked. Like
Yeah.
26 years later.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, because, you know, it's always, you know, yeah, exactly like that. As your kid, the adults say, you know, I was your age once too, you know, you shouldn't do this kind of thing, but you don't comprehend it until you become an adult
No.
and you're their age, or you've got kids of your own, or, you know, la di da da. And then you can start to realize, oh, it all makes so much more sense now. But I think in the moment, your parents saying clean your room, or, you know, do your bed or whatever, you're thinking it's like do, chore. I don't want to do it. And there's no context, or there's no relation to or correlation to why is this important, or how is this relevant to my life. Yet it takes you, you know, maybe for some of us, it takes 1 year, 2 years, maybe it takes 20 years to where finally an adult to really, really click. But then when you apply that to, you know, once again, coming back to that scenario of around education, it's very much the same, because who can even tell what is going to then be relevant and not relevant to take away? Because things as simple as times tables, it's how it uses our brain, how we think, how we apply things to life. They're going to be so, you know, crucial to just how we go live life, even though it's got nothing to do with the times table. Because as you said, it's how we, you know, apply ourselves, or practical thinking, and how it becomes relevant. Because there's so many people that would not study business, yet they're business owners, yet they're, you know, they're doing millions of dollars and things like that. When there's people that study business, yet they struggle to even survive in the business world. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people are wired differently, right? Like you can have people that study it and do really well for themselves wealth-wise, and then others that are just like, I'm a doer. I'm just going to do for other people and help people that way. And yeah, I mean, you'll always have this kind of, you know, continuum of people and wherever they land and whatever they do. But yeah, I definitely think that like education is a great foundation. Does it need to maybe change and be updated? Definitely.
Yeah. And it's, yeah, so I guess it's that great debate of how do you even start with that. And I know that we could go on hours for that, but I mean, maybe I'll let you tease a little bit into that area. So like, if you were going to change one thing, like, and you can keep this very surface level if you like, where would you even start? Like, where would something, or what's an example for the audience to hear of something that maybe to help them mull over or think about, of what would be something that would make sense to potentially even consider changing up?
I think on a kind of surface, somewhat seems small, but it's definitely not small later, is just having like softer skills. It doesn't even need to be like this is a core subject. It just needs to be like workshopped and stuff like that. I think that, you know, at every age and every, you know, whether you're in primary school, secondary school, I think we need to understand ourselves a little bit better. And I think that helps us understand ourselves, other people, and what you want to do and how you want to get there. I think that's really important. And particularly like, you know, like now we're adults and you're always working with people, whether, you know, you need them to work on something with you or even just collaborating like this, right? So I think that, and in addition to that, I think it's just kind of understanding yourself, like to bring it back to Muay Thai, I guess, like understanding like your emotions and how you feel today, or just basic things like that. I think people neglect them quite a lot, and then as a result, you know, you have people who are compensating in other ways. I think it's relatively simple. Like they don't need to, and I'm sure they exist in some schools already. Like my primary school, we had one class, But at that age, and I think that's why it needs to be reinforced over time and like every year, at that
Yeah.
age, you're kind of like, yeah, this is an interesting like novel class, and you tune out and you don't really care about it again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point, because a lot of the time, you're right, we go through it, there is obviously, make people challenge you in school, what do you want to do, what do you want to be, which is very surface level anyway. But
Mhm.
it's not really till you maybe in your teenage years, or you get out of high school, that's when you still really start to try to consider, well, who am I, what am I doing, what
Yeah.
am I about. Yet you've just spent 10, 12 years of educating yourself towards a system of going out to do something, which is perfectly fine, but you don't even know who you are, so you're accustomed to falling back into that box. And I think that's a really good perspective of it, because if we were actually trying to self-discover earlier, potentially we would have a completely different outcome. And I know some people's probably debate would be to like, oh, well, that's the parents' job, right? But at the same
Mhm.
time, they're stuck in this system where they're not necessarily attending to their child or to their children to the way we would expect, because they're also expecting, oh, well, why isn't the school teaching you this?
Yeah. Definitely. Like I think that it's equal responsibility, but at the same time, it's like, you're paying for an education, and fair enough, like their job is to get you from one level to the next,
Yeah,
from secondary to tertiary, and then to get a job, and then that's their goal. But like, why does that have to be it? And why is that the only thing that education needs to prioritize? Like,
yeah,
why can't we just make people whole and like, well rounded? And they've got academics, and they've got sport, and all the extracurricular activities kind of do that, but it's just missing this one element of just kind of understanding a little bit deeper.
yeah,
And I think, you find that if that's the goal of the schools, those kids will excel.
yeah, yeah. It look, it is, it's a bit of a slippery slope, or a continuous circle, as you said before. It's always going to be that continuum, but unless there's a dramatic change or a consistent change over a long period of time, we probably won't see anything. I mean, conversations like this is key and important, and that's why I was so keen to have you in this conversation, because when it does come back to furthering your lifestyle, I'm not here to tell people that they have to not do the 9 to 5, or they need to make a
Mm,
change, but help people really understand that there's opportunity of so much more, whether it's for yourself, to help others, and it can be for a lifestyle change, whether it is a side hustle or to pursue a
mhm,
passion. And I think the
mhm.
earlier we know this, the better it's going to be, not for just for the individual, but probably over a snowball effect time, or a long period of time, for society and the people that we, I guess, interact with, because
Yeah.
we influence and encourage and inspire other people, even if we don't intend to or don't realize it. You're always looking at the next best person, or who's further along the chain in terms of how they're fighting, and there's someone
Mm,
going to always be looking at you thinking, oh, I wish I could be like May, she does this so good in the ring or whatever. And it's the same with anything in life, where, I mean, Instagram's that perfect example. We're always seeing what other people are doing. We're not necessarily saying it out loud, I want to be like them, but I guarantee from the psychology standpoint, you're probably thinking, yeah, but we're seeing all these things, so we're wiring our brain to think we want that, we want this, or why can't I
yeah.
do that? So it does start with making small changes and having the conversation. It's a big job to do.
Yeah, for sure. Like I'm really, I don't know, I would say that my parents and whatever they did raised me in a way to be really resilient against, things, and just to keep pushing through. Like a good example, when I was in high school, like I constantly was just like, why do I need to work at the restaurant and study at the same time? Like other people are studying, just studying. And that annoyed me so much. And now that I'm older, I'm like, oh yeah, I can juggle all these things, and that's
Yeah,
okay. And I think that we want to aspire to be all these things, and it's really, and no one tells you about how difficult it is or how hard it was, or
yeah.
that I want to have 6 pack abs, but it's actually like quite challenging. There's going to be days where I hate myself and what how I look like and all these things, and no one talks about that.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I just giggle at the 6 pack abs, because it's one of those cliche things, but everyone's always thinking about it. You're just like, oh, what do you want to achieve this? It's like, oh, I want to get fit. I want to have and it's that cliche thing, but it's because we're so wired to think, well, that's what everyone needs to be good or to be successful. And it's like with anything. But I really liked your example about coming back to your parents and, getting you to work while you're studying, because once again, it's one of those things which we don't realize the contextual, I guess, importance of it until you go through the experience yourself once you're older and you're getting all these things to juggle through
Mm,
life. I mean, yeah, through high
mm,
school, I remember when, I mean, this is not revealing my age, but I guess, we were going through, when I went through high school, we weren't allowed to use iPads or laptops to do a lot of our writing and all that stuff. And, it was all pen and paper. And
mm,
I remember in year 12, year 11, we wanted to make sure that we're practicing all our essays on, doing the handwriting, because, we could submit it via Word document or whatever, but they said, oh, you need to get used to it, because when you get into uni, you're going to have to do these, obviously bigger assignments, and you'll have 3 hours if you're doing law, for instance, and to be writing all this stuff out. So if you're not getting used to that motion of writing and thinking and things,
mm,
it's going to be tough, right? But
mhm.
that's one thing, you understood what that was going to help you achieve, but there was no one in high school telling you to go, it's like, while you're studying, you should be going to get a job, right? It just doesn't make sense. They said you need to be focusing on your study so you can get good grades, so then you can get a good job, right? But
Yeah.
when you're able to juggle those things and have that commitment, it turns out even better. And one of my recent guests, Ethan Rushok, he was studying accounting, and while he was doing that, he was working at an accounting firm, and it was giving him the experience, the understanding, the knowledge of all the things that he was learning at the same time. Actually, it was probably better for the working, because then when he came
Mm,
out of university, it's always that cliche of, people want, oh yeah, I want someone that's got a bachelor's degree, but 7 years experience. It's like, well, how's that even possible, right? It's like, but for him,
yeah.
he had the skill set that he was able to apply because he's already learnt it. And,
Mm,
he was able to then say, well, a lot of the uni stuff probably, surface level, but the experience of working, part-time along the way turned out so much better. But you don't know that until you've done it, kind of thing.
exactly. So my parents had a small, I shouldn't say small, but essentially a local, just a Thai restaurant. They've had it ever since I was little. So first we had it in Byron Bay, and then on the Gold Coast, where I kind of did my schooling.
Yep.
And it's all, you do it, right? You don't really think about, oh yeah,
Yeah.
this is I'm doing like HR stuff right now, or like I'm customer service. You just
Yep.
do.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting, because when I went to uni and then I started doing business, like I didn't know what those terms were. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, we do them already. So it was
Yeah.
really easy to just make the connection and be like,
Yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
no, that's right. Whereas most of the time in the education, it's like, oh, you're going to be doing HR, and you're like, it doesn't make sense until you do it.
Yeah.
It's always funny, because then you have those click moments. But if you were clicking while learning it at the same time, you're going to soar quicker. And I think that's why,
Mm,
not saying people have better advantages than others, but we all have that terminology of an unfair advantage. Some people have, for you, working with your parents at your restaurant is an unfair advantage because it puts you ahead of that knowledge you might not necessarily know at the time. But when it
mm,
push comes to shove and you can utilize it, you're going to be ahead of the person next to you who has no experience with HR. But you're like, oh, I've done this,
yeah.
right? And
Interesting.
it's very interesting, because all of a sudden, because of how you were brought up, where you were, what you were able to do, it's not saying that it was unfair that you got to do that, but it's an unfair advantage to the person next to you because they didn't get that experience. But it's just the way it is.
Interesting. I don't, yeah, I get it. I'm kind of like, was an experience or an opportunity, or at the time, was it just
Well, you
like
don't know.
forced?
Yeah, it's
But
it's not relevant to you in that perspective then. Yeah.
it's funny, because I was like, at the time, I probably would have said that I had the unfair advantage in that I never had enough time to like give to my studies what other people would
Hmm.
have, because I'm family.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how it serves you later.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, once again, coming back to that classic thing of hindsight and as we grow and mature. But I think it's kind of like we're talking to ourselves back 5-10 years ago or even more. But at the same time, you try and teach this to a younger audience or a younger age, but they can't comprehend it. And I think that's probably where we're trying to fix that. But it's still that struggle of, how do you teach someone something if they can't comprehend it until they've done it
Mhm.
themselves, right? It's like when I run, when I did my first 5K, that was a lot to swallow. But once I had done it, it was like, okay, well, I can do a 5K every day now. I've done it. Like it's,
Yeah.
I can comprehend it. and I can fathom what it's going to take to potentially do 10K. And then so, as it builds up. So it's a very interesting thing, because here we are trying to solve that problem of how do you make people comprehend, which I'm probably sure everyone's tried to solve over the years and years, of how do we enable people to learn these things quicker, rather than just saying you need to do the dishes, or you need to work this weekend, or you need to do your bed, because in your mind it's like, why are you telling me to do this? And they're like, it's because I love you, right? but you get that now, but it's so bizarre. It's so bizarre.
It's interesting. We're all on a learning curve, right? Like, you only know so much, especially when you're that young. Yeah, I was gonna say, which is why I think it's like so important to just like do, and also in addition to that, like take the time to reflect and understand, because it'll make it a lot easier later on.
Yeah, that's true. I think we are in a very, I can appreciate that we're in a very rushed society. Once again, using the highlight reel of Instagram as an example, we're always seeing what everyone else is doing, or which is fine. It's good to share and tell, but we don't necessarily stop and give ourselves a pat on the back and see how far we've come. And this has come up quite a lot in quite a few other episodes, where the best analogy is, when you look at the share market, it is that roller coaster. On a daily view, it looks like it's dropped down, but when you zoom out 5 years, 2 years, 10 years, whatever, you realize you're way up, but you're just down that one day. And it's exactly the same with life. Is we go through those ruts where we're like, okay, nothing's working, this isn't good, or but then when you take a zoomed out or bird's eye view and actually reflect, you realize that, wow, how far have I come, or what have I achieved, or what have I learned, or I can appreciate, who those people were and what they taught me when I was younger, because now you can see the relevance of it now. And that is, it's tough to slow down, yet, go fast at the same time. And I know that's it's a famous book as well, in order to, to go fast, slow down, right? But it's very true. You need to take those moments to just breathe, smell the roses, and understand, well, what's actually happened, before you can even start to think on those bigger proportions.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like on a small scale, I see those nearly every day, like because we train so frequently. I'm like, yeah, Monday, Tuesday, good, up, and then Wednesday, like down here, exhaust, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna climb back up Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
And then by the end of it, the next year, you're like, wow, I've learned so much.
It's one of those things, because I feel like we're expecting it to just happen overnight. And once again, it's always that debate, is like, is that because that's the way we're wired, or is it because it's the way we've become wired from what we're always seeing? And obviously that there's no right or wrong answer to that, and we probably can never define exactly, but it's interesting, because we're always built to be doing, chasing, pursuing, whatever it is. It's always going to be different, but it is always that one thing I come back to, and it's like, well, is this because of the way I've kind of been molded, or is it just the way I am, or is it just because of everything else in between? So it's always a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I feel those things every day, and I have to stop and be like, look, it's okay. Or like, I expect to be a particular way, or have a particular result, or, like my body weight to be a particular number. And then I'm like, yeah, but at the same time, this year I've taken on studying honors, which I didn't have previously. And so that takes away a huge chunk of time, which I could have dedicated to, making the right meals and running a little more. And I'm like, so I can't expect those same results or change something, And so, there are some days where I'm like, oh, no, it's all right. Look, it's okay.
Well, that's it. I mean, you're never going to be perfect anyway, because you can't be perfect. So it's kind of like you got to be perfect within your own, I guess, realms of your walls, or whatever is your operating environment. So, which is, it's a really good segue to talk more about you on a personal level. So, when it comes back to the kickboxing, all the training and all that, you kind of alluded to it at the start, how much that has helped you from a mental side of things, and the self-awareness. And you've kind of even touched on just what you've said now of, how you have to think differently, and, the discipline and the requirement for you to enable you to train at such high capacity. Because I had no idea of that. So, let's touch on that. So, how did you even get into doing that in the first place? And then how has it evolved over time?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So my background is Thai, so I have
Yeah.
grown up kind of seeing it on TV and seeing dad watch it and stuff, but I actually really didn't like it because they were young boys, like, they're small 16-year-old boys who are just bashing each other. And I didn't know how to watch it. So I was like, don't want to watch it. It's
Yeah.
so aggressive. And then I kind of got a little bit older, and we used to do these so where my family was on the Gold Coast, we used to have like Thai festivals and stuff,
Okay.
and there would always be Muay Boran, which is like ancient Muay Thai showcased, just
Okay.
like a exhibition. And I was like, this is really cool and quite beautiful, and like to kind of understand the history and the background a little bit more. It was like a form of fighting that was developed for like combat in
Okay.
Thailand, mostly like civil, and kind of taking it from there and kind of looking at it more. I was like, this is really pretty. Like, it's actually quite beautiful, very technical. It is brutal, but there's a lot of skill there. You know what I
Complete
mean?
opposite. It's like it's so pretty but brutal layers.
But I think it's the same with all martial arts. Like the thing about
Well, that's
martial
true.
arts, I think,
Because
like
it's not about
the more you learn
attacking.
about it,
It's more, yeah, yeah,
exactly. Kind of like a dance, but with martial arts, it's like the more you learn about it, the more you don't use it. Like the people that are really good at it are like, we're going to find every opportunity to not use it,
yeah.
um, which is quite cool. So yeah, and I guess when I moved, my parents were always like, nope, you're not doing it. You're not doing Muay Thai. And then I moved down to Melbourne, and I was like, I'm going to do it.
uh,
um, and I was really lucky. So there's a couple of gyms here, and I found Dominance and my coach Neil Ortega, and I still remember my very first day. I was completely new, and that day there was like a beginners class on one side and then the fighters class on the other, and he was kind of running both at the same time simultaneously. And he always takes the new people. So he took me, and I don't think I've ever kicked in my life or really punched properly in my life, and I did. And he was like, "Oh yeah, like I can see you got a bit of like potential." Um, and then, but he also, I could see, like, when you're new, like, I could see people were kind of watching, and I was like, and he literally was just like, relax, you're too uptight, and just was so upfront and so blunt. And it kind
yeah,
of caught me off guard. And I was like, that's exactly how I feel. Like, how did you know that?
yeah,
And it's easy to tell in people's movements, right? Particularly being a coach of like that
yeah,
many years and that kind of like fight history of his own. He just knew. You just
yeah,
understand people so quickly. And I was like, wow. And then from there I was like, I'm staying with you. And so it's been probably about 2 years now, but considering COVID and everything,
yeah,
and it's quite interesting the things you learn and go through. And that first like 6 months was such a journey.
yeah,
And it was something else as well. So I started in beginners naturally, and
yeah,
they eventually kind of pulled me over and was like, yeah, you can join us now. And the intermediate kind of, they were the fighters. And it was a challenge being there, but it was exciting
yeah,
because I was like, oh yeah, I'm leveling up. I've learned so much and I've made so much like sharp progress. But at the same time, they're all pros. And so I was obviously always just the baby, and
yeah,
I was not going to be as good as them like soon. And I think it's hard, I think, to like fathom that. But at the same time, I was always like motivated, but it was always like, you can get me every day, like every
yeah,
single day, beat me up every day.
yeah,
Yeah. And not hard to become good friends with all those people after that.
yeah,
But yeah, definitely, yeah, you learn a lot about yourself and the things like, like for example, when you're holding pads, right, for other people, and it's new and a new experience, you have to spend, the rounds are 3 minutes,
right,
and three-minute rounds, and you essentially need to call out everything they need to do. So whether it's kind of combo or kicks and
right,
punches,
okay,
and if you're new, you're like, I don't know what should come after next or how I should be holding for you. And it's kind of confronting because these people that you're holding for are good. Like
yeah.
they get pads held for every day. And then you're like,
So
it's
it's
all right. And then
actually
you just
just
say,
as much work for you then.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and you have to have really strong forearms, I've noticed. That's how you brace, really. And, you call like one thing after the other, and then you're like, oh, 3 minutes is done. I did
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And at first you're like, oh, I don't really want to. And it's the same with any of the movements. And I found that it's the same with anything else I want to do. Like I might be like, I don't want to call that person,
yeah,
but maybe I should. Like,
yeah.
Yeah,
it's a
it's
very good,
translated that.
yeah, it's a very good parallel into life in general, right? Because a lot of the time, the only thing stopping us is us not taking action or giving it a go. And you used a perfect example of making that call or sending that email or reaching out,
Mm,
because it's like, what's the worst thing that happens is a no.
mm,
But we're
mm.
so scared of that no. I think I would be more scared of the, holding the pad, because like, well, you're more likely to get hurt. I mean, you're not even going to get hurt making the call. I mean, like, yet we're so fearful of it.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it's crazy. And I think, well, once again, that must be so good for you to be able to then apply those, that same relevance across into work, into life, and in general, because it really brings, I guess, a stronger mental capacity, but also that self-awareness, right?
For sure, definitely. Like you will know immediately whether something sits well with you or doesn't when
Yeah,
you're even when you're training, and especially if you're sparring someone, and definitely if you're in the ring. And I think that's where the call comes, and to understand yourself, because you will have a team, and yes, they have the best interest, your best interest at heart, but at
yeah,
the same time, if they're like, hey, you should go do this, or you should fight with this person, and you're like, you
mm,
need to be strong enough to say that, like, you don't quite feel it, or that's not okay,
yeah,
whatever the situation may be. And I think that's the same with life, and whatever um, circumstance kind of comes your way. So, yeah.
yeah.
Very
So
important. Hmm.
yeah, so I'd love to ask you then. So, what's your current goals and ambitions? I mean, obviously, you kind of said you're going for a fight, but let's touch on that briefly. So, what are you aiming for, or what are you trying to achieve?
Well, that was always my goal, and I was going, we were on track to do that a lot sooner, but then Honors was like, hello, I'm here this year and you're going to
Yeah,
do me now. So I had to push that back a little bit. But yeah, my goal is to definitely get in the ring and kind of just, yeah, display a very beautiful technical fight. And, after all the years of training with the team, I think it'd be great to kind of show them and show me.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what defines a fight? Like, is it an event thing? Is it has to be a certain, like, so for someone that has no understanding and anyone
Oh,
listening, what if to you,
yeah.
what does that mean? Does that mean something that people are paying up to see, or is it just, yeah,
Generally, yes.
yeah,
So there are amateur fights organized like by Muay Thai Victoria, for example, but generally it will be like a paid promotion where you might be like an amateur or a semi-pro fighter, and you're matched with someone from another gym.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, and then that's it. Then you fight it out. You generally win. You can win on points, a knockout, or a technical knockout, which I
yeah,
think is like 3 knockouts in the one round
right,
would be a technical knockout. Sounds scary, but it's one of those things, right? Like once you're prepared for it,
yeah,
it's just like, okay, let's have some fun. And at the end of the day, and I think the really beautiful thing that I love about Muay Thai is there's a lot of respect there for your opponent and the gym. Like you're not there to murder them. You're
yeah,
there to kind of showcase, I guess, your skills against each
yeah,
other. And yes, it's a bit rough, but you know, the, like you still, at the end of the day, you still appreciate and have a lot of respect for them.
yeah. And I mean, I don't want to assume, but I assume it is gender based in terms of fights. It's like, yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Cool.
for
Just, hey,
sure.
you never know. You never know. It's
Yeah, I mean, like there's conversations around, like speaking of gender based, there usually it's male and female, but there is a transgender fighter
oh,
in
okay,
Thailand. Longest time, because he was male transitioning female, fought males.
right.
Made sense, and I think now it's changing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, well,
Yeah.
because it opens up a whole different world. I mean, once that happens more and more, and it is then it's that debate of it, and knowing people's limits and things like that, and it all really comes down to individual. But I guess that comes back to the conversation of what we were chatting about before: someone defining what those limitations are.
Oh yeah,
Um,
for sure. I mean, it's a big conversation now with the Olympics going on, right? So,
that's true. That's true.
mm,
So with you've touched on your goals and ambitions and in how it's done such greatness for yourself, which I'm excited.
mhm.
I'm super excited to follow along, and I can't wait. Do you have any timeline for that? For that fight, like any aspiration of when you would want to try and achieve that, assuming the stars align and things, don't keep changing from a lockdown and COVID perspective. But yeah, is there a timeline?
Well, I always said at the end of the year, but now it's looking maybe later. And yeah,
no,
we'll
that's
have
okay.
to wait for the coach to make the call on that one.
That's okay. No, that's exciting. That's really exciting. And while we're on this topic, because I feel like what you do, this is really relevant to it. I would love to know what's your take on leveraging lemons when life throws them at you. So like, what's your perspective on that, and how would you respond to that when life gives you lemons? What do you do with it?
Well, if life throws you lemons, as you say, I would try catch them.
Yeah.
I think there's a time and place to go with the flow, and I think a lot of the time we should. If the risks aren't too big for someone, I think you should always, take the lemons and see what they give you.
Okay.
It's a great way, I think, to see what's next. And a lot of, while we do have all our, while people have goals, I don't think they're all defining and limited, and they're like, this is it. This is the only place I'm going, and I don't care about that. I think it's always a good thing to kind of have a look and see what's around, particularly as the world keeps progressing so quickly and for the better. Like there are some things that are limited and need to change, but I think otherwise change is exciting.
Yeah. No, that's a really good answer. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer to it, but I love hearing your perspective on that. It's really, really good. And it's a really good segue to a segment of rapid fire questions, which I would love to ask you. I mean, you try and answer them quickly, but if you can't, and if you want to add in some value points to the audience, that's more than, okay. So the first one being, what's your favorite book or audio book or podcast that you have read or consumed?
There's three. I would say that I like The Alchemist. It's quite beautiful.
Yes.
And Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh, yeah.
I think is fun to kind of understand points and systems and things like that. And then also there's a third book called Legacy.
Okay.
And it's a book written about the All Blacks. And it was actually given to me by my previous workplace. And it was like 15 lessons on leadership and business by the All Blacks. And it's actually really good.
No, that's really good. Some really good books. So The Alchemist I've read, Outliers I've actually got sitting on my shelf behind me, and Legacy. Yeah, no, I haven't heard of that one, but really good to hear. I always love hearing what people have consumed or what their favorite stuff is, because it's where we build and develop ourselves, and it's always great advice, I think, for anyone listening.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The next one for you then is advice you would give yourself as a teenager.
I would say keep going, and it's okay if you're not the best. That's okay. Just keep going. Like these things will all make sense later. Just don't stop.
How do you spend your free time?
Oh my gosh, I don't have a lot of free time.
I was going to say it probably doesn't sound like you have a lot, but when you do, what would you like to do?
When I do, I generally eat a lot during my spare time. Melbourne is a great place to either eat out or explore the markets and stuff like that. So I do enjoy like just being outside and doing that, and catching up with people that I haven't been able to see.
Yeah, nice. 10 years from now, what do you think the world looks like? And this is a very broad and deep question, so answer it however you please.
Oh my gosh, so interesting. I think that we will have a lot more equality. I think it'll be slow, but I think we'll get there, and the conversations will start kind of just being more prominent. With that said, obviously, potentially more protests for things like that.
Yeah.
But I think it'll be a great conversation starter, people talking about things that are usually like behind closed doors.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's great. And the last one is a couple of sources of inspiration that you have or that you go to.
Interesting. So my first couple sources of information are of inspiration are similar. I would say my parents and my coach and his girlfriend, just because they're just people that are everyday people but are really inspiring in the things that they do. It's simple, it's consistent, and you can see their achievements, and I think that makes it really achievable for me too. So I guess like having everyday people like that is really good. And then in addition, this is such a cliche, but I actually really enjoy Tony Robbins.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah,
Yeah, I
no,
mean,
that's good.
like the things that he talks about, and I think, there may be arguments that it's too simple, but I think it's a great place to start in kind of like um, understanding your needs and desires and how
Yeah.
people are and your habits and stuff like that. I just
Yeah.
think it's a simple one to go to.
But usually it is the simple things that are the big ones, right? I mean, you could
Yeah,
almost
for
say
sure.
that thinking of your parents is the cliche answer as well. But I think it's great because how you said that, they are just everyday people, and it is sometimes we need that, just come back to earth, come, just to ground
For
us
sure.
and bring us back to reality. And I mean, I haven't read a lot of Tony Robbins stuff, but some of it I have consumed, and it's a lot of it is that simple stuff just played back into that perspective, which you think, I could have told myself this, yet hearing it from
Yeah.
someone else is what makes the difference.
What I
Which is,
really love
yeah,
from him is when he highlights excuses that people make and like patterns that you're stuck in.
yeah,
And like say the classic one is being like, oh, I really want to lose weight, but I'm big boned. And he was like, well, you've just put yourself in a box and a barrier because you say you're big boned, but
yeah,
that might not be the case. And so you feel stuck, right? So it's really cool when he
yeah,
kind of does that, because I think a lot of us are comfortable in particular things, and then just to have someone be like, have
yeah,
you really tried everything, or have you
that's
tried like
true.
two things over and over again? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And they wouldn't have even had the test of if they're big bones. Like it's one of those,
exactly.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah. Wow. This has been really, really good, man. I really do appreciate it because we've touched on so much. And for the audience listening, we've probably gone through quite a lot of deep stuff that I probably haven't really spoken
Oh,
about on the podcast before, because these are all conversations which I think go, as I said earlier, go along the side or parallel to when it comes to about furthering your lifestyle, because it's not always about us or you. It is about the people we're influencing, the people around us, and the world in general, because everything that we do does leave an influence to others. And it's been really, really great to have this conversation. But before we finish, I wanted to um give you the chance to say, if there was one thing that you would want to leave with the audience, that, or a takeaway from this podcast, what would that be?
I would just say get started and do it. Like Nike. Just do it. See where it leads you. At the end of the day, it may or may not be the right thing, but I think if you just give it a go, it's never that bad.
That's it. Simple advice, but it's great advice. And if anyone wants to follow along, reach out to you, or whatever it may be, where's the best place to follow you or to contact you?
For sure. Please do. I guess everyone can get in touch on Instagram. My handle is just May Chantra. That's it. No dots.
Perfect. No, it'll be in the show notes as well, of course, so people can jump on over. And I encourage everyone to go see. And I'm very excited to follow along more with the training stuff. Obviously, no pressure, because I know you are very busy and you're juggling multiple things. But as that starts to ramp up more and more as you lead up to a fight, I'll be very excited to see how that all pans out, and hopefully somewhere where I can come see, because yeah, I would want to see it in action. Well,
Yeah.
it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. No, it was great. It was great fun. I appreciate the time.
Cheers. Well, there you go, folks. What an awesome episode. And what I love so much about May is just her presence, and how she comes across as so calm, just in the moment, and always willing to have a great conversation. And I mean, we dived into a lot of different things in this episode, and we could probably spend even more time diving into the different subtopics within it. But I think it's important for you all to hear these different understandings, perspectives, and ideas, because we're in a point in the world, in society, of how things are changing, things are adapting, and not just because technology is growing so fast, but just because everything is changing in some sense or another sort. So I think it's important that we do have these conversations, not to say I'm right, not to say she's right, not to say that this is all you need to know, but just to give you that perspective and help you understand that there is opportunity, there is different things happening, and that it's important that you do make sure you take the time to think about, well, how do you want to make a difference in this world, or how do you want to tread your own path? So, May, I really do appreciate you jumping onto this episode, and it's been an awesome journey to have you as part of the brand and the podcast so far to date. And once again, folks, I do encourage you to go jump over to her socials, go follow along of what she's doing. And I'm excited to see that when the kickboxing picks up a bit more and she's able to start, treading towards that fight, and she has that fight, I'm excited to see that in action. And I think this is what it's all about, is setting your mind to those goals with everything else that's going on in life and being able to hustle forward towards it, because we are more than capable of doing so many different things. And I think she proves that point as well. But of course, if you have questions, thoughts, ideas, do let us know. We're more than happy to have the conversation. Really do appreciate you all being here. And it's been an absolute honor to be able to bridge this conversation between you and May as well. So thank you for being here, and you have a wonderful day. Now, if you didn't know, we do have the podcast merch, and this is with a key focus of enamel pins. Now, if you haven't checked these out, make sure you do, because the intent of these are really just to be a small token and a reminder for you to charge on, to push on, and to further your lifestyle, whether it is a gift for someone else to encourage them, or maybe to inspire them, or maybe it's a way to motivate yourself, or you can simply just make a purchase to simply support the podcast, which would be greatly appreciated. We do also have some sweaters and some long tees, so make sure you check it out. Link in the description and in the show notes. Really do appreciate it. Cheers.